So the currency symbol was created by taking the first letter of each word, original issue currency, and combining them together. So original issue is essentially energy. I would like to thank Spirit Science for putting this information out there. In the description below I've put a link so that you can get back to their channel. And yes, I hope you enjoy this a lot. I surely enjoyed making it.
Everything in the universe is geometric, whether it's people, trees, cats, planets, solar systems, stars, you name it. Anything in the universe can be measured on a geometric scale. Having said that, it's important to note that creation is also geometric. What we're going to be looking at today is the pattern of creation. Essentially what this means is that everything in the universe comes out of this single pattern. I'm not making this up. This single image will change everything. When I mentioned in lesson 5 that the ancient Egyptians and even more ancient civilizations knew about a deeper, basic understanding of the universe, this is the flower of life. And it is also the creation pattern of everything in existence. Even non-tangible things, emotions, thoughts, music in its entire spectrum, everything comes from this image. Okay, so there are 13 information systems that comes out of the flower of life. This thing is everywhere. Not only that, but everywhere around the world it has the same name, the flower of life. Now, to understand the flower of life, first we have to talk about how it's formed. This could get incredibly complex, so I'll try and keep it simple. Imagine consciousness, or spirit, floating in a void, which means it's nothingness, and then spirit. No physical body or mind, just spirit, and that's it. Then blackness, essentially nothing, all around the spirit, for infinite. Spirit decides to do something, so it expands its consciousness all around itself as far as it can go without moving. It creates a sphere around itself. This is the first circle in the flower of life. Then, spirit has an awareness of what's around itself in 360 degrees. It moves to the very edge of the sphere anywhere and repeats what it did the first time. It creates this image, which also creates the Vesica Pisces. Within the Vesica Pisces is a vast and incredible amount of knowledge about width, proportion, depth. Also comes the square roots of 2, 3, and 5, which are all numbers that go on forever. But even more interestingly, comes geometric information about light. We'll talk about that in a moment. Now, spirit has no choice but to do it again. Spirit is flawless, and therefore it will move flawlessly, creating the next circle either here or here, exactly one radius away from the other circle next to it. Every time spirit moves another sphere, more and more knowledge comes out of the image that is created. The first complete image to be formed is this. It has two names, the seed of life, or the Genesis pattern, and for good. The second image beyond Genesis in the flower of life is the egg of life. This is formed during the second vortex motion. Upon its completion, it creates an image like this, a three-dimensional shape that you can hold in your hand. If you were to connect their centers, you would see a cube. So what? Who cares? Well, the ancient Egyptians did, because they were concerned with creation, life, and death. They called this cluster of spheres the egg of life. You probably won't believe me just yet, but this shape is the morphogenic structure that created your body. Your entire physical existence is dependent on the egg of life structure, and everything about you was created from that form. Everything from your eye color to how long your fingers are. This is a whole lesson on its own, so let's move on for now. All around the world, the flower of life was always made the exact same way. See, this pattern can clearly go on forever. However, they always stopped after 19 circles. Why? Well, because they didn't want you to see what I'm about to show you. Back then, this image and knowledge was so sacred that they couldn't allow it to become common knowledge. It was appropriate at that time. However, now we either use the information or fall further into darkness. In biology, all cells have a zona pellucida around the edge. These circles around the flower of life are the zona pellucida of the flower of life. You must remove these, then complete the spheres that were cut off by the zona pellucida. With one more step, you will have the secret. Finish the drawing, add the final missing circles, giving you this. This image is the fruit of life. This pattern of 13 circles is one of the holiest, most sacred forms in existence. It's called the fruit because it is the result, the fruit, from which the fabric of the details of the reality were created. Remember when we talked about male and female energy, lesson 4? As you can see, this image is female. It has no straight lines. However, when you combine male lines with these female circles, something amazing happens. What you do is draw a straight line from the very center of every single circle to every other circle in this image. When you do this, you get an image which is known throughout the universe, everywhere, as Metatron's cube. It is one of the most important informational systems in the universe, one of the basic creation patterns in existence. So what is Metatron's cube? Well, anyone who has studied sacred geometry, or even regular geometry for that matter, knows that there are 5 unique shapes in the universe, and that they are crucial to understanding both regular and sacred geometry. They are called the Platonic solids. Anyways, recognize this? The periodic table of elements? Every single element on this table has a geometric relation to one of these 5 shapes. Modern scholars ridiculed this idea until the 1980s, when Professor Robert Moon at the University of Chicago demonstrated that the entire periodic table of elements Literally everything in the physical world is based on these same 5 forms. In fact, throughout modern physics, chemistry, and biology, the sacred geometric patterns of creation are being rediscovered. Another example is the egg of life that I showed you earlier. Hopefully that will help you to understand just how incredible and important of a discovery this truly is. Everything that modern science knows about the elements and reality are tied together through the Platonic solids, which come out of Metatron's cube, which is formed out of the fruit of life, which comes from the flower of life, which is made by spirit. Damn. We have all of these hexagons, and yet there is no Platonic solid that is formed with a hexagon. So what gives? Well, I want to introduce the vector equilibrium, which was coined by Buckminster Fuller. It is actually formed from 3 two-dimensional hexagons that swivel around each other, and its basic shapes that make it up are an equilateral triangle and the square. These are the 2 smallest shapes that you can make with straight lines, and together they balance at each other's corners to create the perfect shape. Why is it the perfect shape? The reason is that every single line which is connected in this shape is the same distance away from every other point, including the very center of the shape itself. Not even the Platonic solids have that definition, which also makes this the most stable shape and polyhedron, and the basis of the 3-dimensional flower of life. Garrett demonstrates to us how the particles that create point particles really work. He shows that when you plot them out in how they move, this is what they look like. At the tiniest scales of the universe in how it works is very beautiful. Now look at this. This is one of the ways that these charges branch off from each other. As you can see, it flows in a hexagonal pattern, the same pattern that we found in the expanded flower of life. Then, if you rotate this pattern in 6-dimensional charge space, you see it forms yet another pattern. Many of you will recognize this as the shape of the Star of David, but its true name is the star tetrahedron, which maps perfectly over the fruit of life. This entire pattern created by the particles is mapped across over precise places on a 200-dimensional spherical shape scientists have called E8, of which also has a geometric shape. By rotating that shape as well, you can see how there are nearly infinite possibilities as to how these elementary particles interact with each other. The details of the reality begin to take form. Now, as this shape is rotating in 8 dimensions, you can see a myriad of different patterns here. Look at this one in particular. This looks a lot like Metatron's cube, doesn't it? At the heart of particle physics is pure, beautiful geometry. By now, you probably can begin to see where sacred geometry falls into this. Where do these shapes originate? Do they just come into being at random? Or does the first shape come from somewhere else? In lesson 6, we talked about the flower of life, the original, perfect geometric symmetry that created the universe. This shape, as we learned, is not only the root of all mathematical proportion, light, the Platonic solids, but is also the source of every musical system in the universe, including systems both used and unknown to modern man. It is also the source of energy patterns and, well, everything. It all comes from the flower of life. I believe this is what is at the heart of what's forming every subatomic particle formation, and it probably goes at least a few levels deeper than what Garrett is showing us. Phi, also known as the golden ratio, or golden mean, is a very simple relationship. If you had a rod and were going to put a mark on it, only 2 places would mark the phi ratio, which is here or here. The length of A plus B is equal to the length of C. This ratio is 1.6180339 and continues on forever. If you multiply the length of C with phi, it will create the exact same image, only bigger. C and D is equal to E. This ratio could then span on forever, going smaller and smaller or bigger and bigger forever. This ratio is infinite. It has no beginning and no end. It is also believed that phi is the mathematical root of all other sequences. See, every mathematical sequence in existence needs a minimum of 3 numbers to figure out the sequence. Phi only needs 2. It is the only one. Similar to how the circle and square are the source of all shape, but we'll get to that later on. The next thing that you need to know is that this ratio is found in all life everywhere. Sort of. By sort of, I mean it's really Fibonacci, but we'll look at that in a moment. Look at your hand. Not only does each finger have its own ratio moving up each finger, which is phi to the next bone, but it oscillates back and forth from the tallest finger to the thumb. You wonder why the human hand is like that? It's based on phi. This relationship is found throughout the body in various ways, moving up the arms and legs, in your face, throughout the entire body. This is a Greek statue that accurately represents this. The Greeks were very precise when they made their art, because they understood phi, Fibonacci, and the importance of these sequences. When the Romans took over Greece, you could see the perfection in statues just completely disappear. I'm not saying the Romans were bad artists, they just didn't measure everything to the same caliber that the Greeks did. Here is the phi ratio in butterflies. You can see this ratio everywhere, from the wing size to the body to the antennas. They're all phi ratios. Here's dragonflies. It's the same story. Phi runs along the entire body, and the relation to the body and the wings. Here it is in frogs. Phi is found throughout the body in relation to the head, to the arms, to the fingers, and so on. Well, what about fish? You'd think they wouldn't be found in fish. Well, here's 3 kinds of fish. Once again, the ratios are consistent. It doesn't just apply to these creatures though. Regardless of what mammal, insect, avian, plant, or living creature of any kind, you will find this ratio one way or another. Let's move on to our next sequence, which is called Fibonacci. Now the Fibonacci sequence is life's way of creating the golden mean. Allow me to explain. This sequence is continually made from adding the previous number to the current. 1 and 1 is 2, 2 and 1 is 3, 3 and 2 is 5, 5 and 3 is 8. You can see how it continues. Now what most people don't know about Fibonacci is that it actually continually strives closer and closer to the phi ratio. By dividing the current number into the last, you can see this happening. 1 into 1 is 1. Well, that's not close at all. 2 into 1 is 2. This time it's over phi, but closer. 3 into 2 is 1.5, which is under, but closer still. 5 into 3 is 1.666. This time it's over, but even closer. Continuing with that, it's 1.6, and then 1.625, 1.615384, 1.619048, and so on. It continually oscillates over and under the phi ratio, never quite making it there, but continuing on closer and closer every time, until eventually you can't even tell the difference. Because phi is an infinite number, this sequence will go on forever. So phi is basically source, or spirit, or God, in a mathematical way of thinking. The math of God. Don't forget that this sequence is an intimate part of nature itself. I'm going to call it source. It is the source of all mathematical sequences, and all life in existence grows based on phi. However, phi has no beginning and no end. Life doesn't know how to deal with that. It's like source says, go and replicate this, and life says, we don't know how. Because life doesn't know how to create from something that has no beginning. So it creates the Fibonacci sequence instead, which has a beginning, but starts out crude, very basic, and then continually goes closer and closer to source, becoming more divine every step. It does take steps too, which actually has quite a bit to do with evolution. According to the Egyptians, this is one of the holiest, most sacred forms in existence. Of course, we already learned one of its informational systems in Lesson 6, and what you just saw was the second, only in reverse order. What this means is that all of the information of music, harmonics, sound, and spirals come out of this image. Not only that, but light and the dimensional levels work in the same way as harmonics, which we've already discussed in Lesson 2, 7, and 9. Meaning that the geometric information about light and dimensions are also related to this star tetrahedron pattern. So what you just saw was the second unraveling from the third rotational pattern of Genesis, the geometry at the heart of creation. Today, we're going to be looking at another way that humans grow through phi. Instead of looking at phi inside the body, we're going to be looking at phi outside the body, and what it means for us in this pivotal point in human history. Do you remember the fruit of life? The first system created the Platonic solids, which created structure throughout the universe. The second system was the basis of how vibration, sound, harmonics, music, and matter are all interrelated in all of creation. Today, we will look at the third system. The fruit of life will reveal itself in the process. We'll call this system the circles and squares of human consciousness. It is what the Chinese called circling the square and squaring the circle. Remember when we discussed the Platonic solids in Lesson 6? I showed you that all of them will sit perfectly within a sphere, each with every corner touching the sphere perfectly. Well, there's one other shape that can do that. It's a characteristic that only one of the Platonic solids have, making it special. It is the cube, which you can put every single Platonic solid inside, and an edge or point will touch the inside of the cube perfectly. Through truncating the cube in different ways, you can create all of the other shapes. Because of this characteristic, it essentially means that the cube is like the father of all shapes. It is a male form, and the sphere is the mother of all shapes. It is a female form. All levels of consciousness in the universe are integrated by a single image in sacred geometry. It is the key to space, time, and dimension, as well as consciousness itself. Each level is a geometric image or lens that spirit looks through to see the one reality, resulting in a completely different experience. In the case of humans, this image is the circle and square. This is what Leonardo da Vinci was doing when he drew this drawing, and I'm going to show you what this circle and square combination mean. If you put a circle inside a square perfectly, and then continue to put another circle and square, each with the same diameter, one radius away on all sides, going outwards, you get a drawing that looks like this. You'll notice that with the first circle and square, they fit perfectly within the other. This also happens with the second circle and square. However, then the squares begin penetrating circles. The male form begins interacting with the female form. Why is this important? Well, the circles and squares begin to equate the phi ratio. See, when the circumference of a circle and the perimeter of the square are equal, this equates the phi ratio. So as you can see on this diagram, on the fourth square and the fifth circle, it begins to create the phi ratio. It's close, but not perfect. It's only a 0.6 difference. I'm measuring in radii, by the way. The inner circle has a radius of 1, so it's 2 radii across. The next is 4, and then 6, 8, 10, and so on. So the one we just looked at makes a close phi ratio, and then it moves out of sync, staying out of sync for a bit, and then bam! Again, it moves into yet another phi ratio. This time, the difference is only 0.52, even closer to perfection than before. This will continue on forever. If you were to continue this drawing outwards to infinity, each time it would go into sync, drop out of sync for a few circles and squares, but then eventually hit phi again closer than it did the last time. Right now, there are 3 primary levels of consciousness that we are going to be talking about. They are essentially who we were, who we are, and who we will be. We'll call it the first, second, and third, so that it's easy to understand what we're talking about. The ancient Egyptians were very concerned with these 3 levels as well, and much of their culture was based on this information. Each of these levels has their own geometric lens too, which look like this. We'll come back to these soon. This is the first level of consciousness, and this is the third. We are on neither of these 2 phi levels on this circle and square chart. Where we are, the second level of consciousness, is here. We are on the 5th square relative to the 6th circle. For quite a while now, I've been saying that we're at a disharmonic level, and it's something that we're passing through as a species. Now you begin to see the bigger picture of what I meant. The reason it's disharmonic is because it does not equate a phi ratio, not even close. Disharmonic levels are important because they bridge a gap between the divine, pure levels. However, when a species is here, it has to get in and get out as fast as possible, or else they will destroy themselves and everything around them incredibly quickly. You can see this happening all around the world today, because we're at the very end of it, and everything is crashing down on us. We've discussed this all before, notably in the intros of lesson 1 and 2. So the reason that we're on this circle and square combination and not the 6th square relative to some other circle is because of this. If you take the square and rotate it 45 degrees, it actually creates a bridge. It connects us from 2 harmonic levels of being. We're moving from one state of being to the other, this time even closer to source. This is a very exciting time for us. Oh, let me show you this too. This is how the Great Pyramid is set up. This chamber here is called the King's Chamber. If you cut the Great Pyramid horizontally at the King's Chamber, which was the main initiation chamber, and rotate the top half 45 degrees, it makes the exact same image as our level of consciousness. There's a reason for that. The Great Pyramid is the key instrument in allowing humans to reach the 3rd level of consciousness, both as a species and individually. In fact, that's part of the reason why the Great Pyramids were created in the first place. Let's talk more about these levels though. So what Leonardo was drawing was actually the first level of consciousness. See how he hid lines in this drawing? If you complete this grid, it creates an 8x8 grid. This is the same 64 square grid found on the first level. Measuring in radii, this grid is 8x8. However, the circle has 10 radii across, so we'll call this first level an 8x10. This is where we were. The first level is the first time self-aware consciousness began. The second level has 10 squares across the large square, and a 12 radii circle, so we'll call it a 10x12. This is where we are now. This level is the 3rd level, which is also called Christ consciousness. It is a 14x18. Now, there's always a reason for everything in sacred geometry. Nothing, absolutely nothing, happens without a reason. Everything is connected. Out of the whole spectrum of possibilities, why did self-aware human consciousness begin when the 4th square went into harmony with the 5th circle? Well, let's overlay the fruit of life over our first level for a second. Look at that! It exactly fits the 4th square and 5th circle perfectly. Do you see the perfection of life? The fruit of life pattern was hidden beneath this pattern all along. They're precisely superimposed over the other. In a right brain way, this is how to explain why consciousness first became self-aware between the 4th square and 5th circle. This sacred image was part of the pattern. The fruit of life was completed at the precise moment that the phi ratio first appeared, and when phi appeared, consciousness had a way to manifest in a new way. Throughout time, many scholars have tried to figure out the secret meaning behind what Leonardo meant with the Vitruvian Man drawing. He was showing us human consciousness. This is where we were, the first level. There is a man who did draw our level though. Da Vinci was studying the works of a man named Vitruvius, who lived 1400 years before Da Vinci, hence the name Vitruvian Man. Vitruvius actually drew his own drawing of consciousness as well, and this is what it looked like. The circle and squares in this one are hidden, less obvious than the Da Vinci drawing. Regardless, they're there, and this is the current circle and square combination around our bodies. This drawing also contains the exact proportions of the Merkaba, which is an important energy system outside of the body, similar to how chakras are an energy system inside the body. This image also contains the diamond that perfectly contains the man from head to feet. This is the same image we saw in the consciousness chart, as well as the Great Pyramid. Further proof that this was what Vitruvius was demonstrating to us when he created this image. So here we have drawings of the first 2 levels of consciousness. From what I know, there is no drawing of a third. If there is, it's sealed up, locked away somewhere, and is probably one of the most sacred drawings in existence. What we know for sure is that we are going through a shift. In almost every ancient text and Bible, it speaks about a great shift and awakening. The Bible speaks about the coming of Christ. This is interesting, actually, because Christ is the name of the third level of consciousness. I didn't just make that up. We are moving into Christ consciousness, which means not that Jesus is going to show up with a big "Ay!" but we are actually moving into the level of conscious understanding that Jesus had. It is the coming of Christ through the human species. When we don't allow the cycles to flow in their natural order, we often create things that feel uncomfortable over and over. Sometimes we call it things we don't want. It's actually a sort of short circuit in the cycle, or a loop. It's not supposed to be a loop. There needs to be a crossing over of the male and female energy. That's what creates the infinity, the oneness that we've all been feeling and talking about. Now, of course, we've also made the connection before between what we have described as cycles, this form, and the structure of DNA. This is the instruction set for the building blocks that make up our being. As we increase our awareness of these instructions and understanding, we can transcend our 3D perspective of reality and shift into an awareness of the interconnected causality of all of the planes of existence. Yes, we should strive to create a life for ourselves and each other that is filled with love, joy, and excitement. But when things aren't going very well, recognize if it's a part of the natural flow, or if somewhere along the way you got caught in the loop. If we lie to ourselves and pretend that the loop is the flow, even when it's not, it limits our ability to create a real transmutation of it, and create something new in its place, going with the flow. Do you understand what I'm saying? Let me say it in a different way just to make sure, because this is incredibly important. Sometimes things go well, and sometimes things go poorly. It's not always your fault, but you are always a factor in the cause, and influence in the cycle. If you can account for the cycle, meaning take account of it, be aware of it, you can choose to actively respond or be responsible and have an able response to it. That's what being a creator is all about. Because no matter how you slice it, McDonald's, landfills, oil rigs, and this entire way of life we've made for ourselves just doesn't work. And I think I can speak for all of us when I say that it could be something different, something magical, and more in harmony with ourselves and the world around us. Waste-free, flying vehicles, spirit centers, cloud cities, interstellar travel, and the infinity of possibilities that come along with it. It's all in the cycles. What we didn't discuss, but probably should have, is that we are a collective. We are one species. You create your own reality, but we are all co-creating our realities together on a much broader scale. Think of an ant colony. Each individual ant decides where they want to go, what food they want to collect, and how they want to do it. But collectively, they are all working together to gather food for everyone, and do what is necessary for the group, whether it be digging tunnels or gathering leaves. Humans are like that, except our mentality of do what's best for everyone is replaced with get enough money to survive, don't worry about the starving people on the street, help giant entities known as businesses take more money from the people, and don't question what's going on. We're doing it to ourselves, and we're doing it together. Together is the key word here. Together, we can break through barriers. Together, we can absolutely change the world, but we can only do it together, not individually.